Welcome to the 2023 DEI Global Conference. It is a bringing together of minds to really form our discussions and transform our minds into how we can be more equitable to foster that true success of equity in the workplace. I'm so pleased now to welcome Love, who is the founder and cultural engineering officer of Unsiloed. Love, welcome and over to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you to the team for hosting this amazing session. It's such a wonderful confluence of practitioners who are so thoughtful about chipping away this thing called inequity. And I am very pleased to be sharing, my vantage point in doing this work, specifically in thinking about psychological safety. Psychological safety has been quite the buzzword for many folks, and there's a lot of curiosity around it. And I'm hoping that during our time together, we can shift from thinking about this as a buzzword and exploring it more deeply as an opportunity to look at the metrics that matter and to think about how psychological safety, alongside our efforts for diversity and inclusion, can really get us to a place of igniting team synergy and creating the innovation that we are hoping that diverse teams really bring about. So as a more formal introduction, my name is Love Odi Kumuyi, and I'm trained as a psychological safety coach and trainer. And I have worked across many fields, with my original training being as a lawyer. And I've shifted out of that field into thinking about, through a more preventative lens, how can we create systems where people are able to work better together? And it's quite interesting that we know that there's so much beauty with diversity in the room, and there seems to be many sticking points and many areas of friction that gets in the way of us really tapping into the richness of diversity. So during our few moments together, I will be giving you a very high-level exploration of what this work looks like. It's many, many layers deep, but we will start by just even assessing what psychological safety is, identifying some practices, and thinking about the types of commitments that helps us to be more thoughtful about psychological safety. So let's go there. I want us to pause for a moment, wherever you are, and just to really breathe in your lived experience, as diverse and as vast as it is. And oftentimes we don't deeply consider our environments, and we think that we must accept things as they are. And sometimes we've become a little bit numb to how we are being impacted by that environment. And it eventually leads to a sense of stress or burnout, or just generalized harmful impacts, cynicism, dissonance, disconnect from who we truly are and what our authentic voices are supposed to be. So I want you to think about your broad lived experience. So think about maybe your current work situation, an environment that you have worked in the past, just your lived experience as a human. And in your human experience, you could close your eyes if it serves you, and just pause. Have you ever felt excluded in a social setting? Have you ever been afraid to ask a question? Have you remained silent when you knew the answer to a problem? Have you ever had someone steal credit for something that you did? Have you given a suggestion that was ignored and oftentimes worked out to be the right suggestion? Have you been rudely interrupted in a meeting? Have you felt that you were the target of a negative stereotype? Have you ever faced retaliation for challenging the status quo? Have you had a boss who asked for feedback but didn't really want it? Have you been publicly shamed or made fun of? Have you been punished for making an honest mistake? And have you been made to feel inferior? Take a deep breath, because this may have brought up quite a bunch for you. In my experience, I have almost never sat in a room where most people didn't identify with at least half of the things that I just named. And as a human, these factors are, through the research, the factor points that have been used to assess psychological safety in a work environment. And if you've experienced it, chances are you've experienced feeling unsafe. And when you feel unsafe, it's unlikely that you are able to put forward your best work or be the most authentic version of yourself. And that's really very important in thinking about how we navigate work. Because as humans, we instinctively sense a vibe, a tone, an atmosphere. And according to research, we respond accordingly. We know when we are not being given the voice that we want or are being mistreated. And it really has a profound impact on our ability to perform, to create value, and to thrive. And this vibe is actually quantifiable and correlated to high team performance. So in every other way, we are looking at how do we optimize productivity, spending, marketing. But often we are forgetting how do we optimize our social environment by creating spaces that allow people to thrive. I'm going to dive into this by offering you a very quick version of what the data says in relation to how does psychological safety get in the way of team synergy, effectiveness, and innovation. So I did a real quick puzzle on the math. This is a combination of many bundles of data. But the data really shows us that when there is social diversity, identity, race, age, socioeconomic background, gender, when there's a social diversity in the room, minus psychological safety, the data consistently shows an increase in relational conflict, stress, and trauma. So we oftentimes make an assumption that let's just bring more bodies in the room, more of this race, more of that gender, more of the sexual expression, and more disability in the room. And this is an unpopular, opinion sometimes, but I do share it with my clients. And I say, if you're not willing to do the work of psychological safety, then leave diversity alone. And it seems a little bit shocking, but the outcome is without psychological safety, the data consistently shows that people are experiencing more conflict, increasing stress, whether that's power stress, racialized stress from the microaggressions, the biases, having to code switch, and over time, trauma from continued and repeated stress. And also the data shows that where there is stress and trauma, consistently learning and creativity drops significantly. Some therapists and scientists have also named that when we are under high stress and trauma, we operate at one developmental level lower than our optimal state of performance. So we actually are less smart when we are under threat. And we experience increased friction and more mistakes and errors happening with the work that we're doing. Because literally our body is trapped in a fear, flight, fight mode. And that really takes us out of being productive. So there is a really powerful negative impact when we try to push for diversity without thinking about the environmental condition in which we expect diverse people to operate. But it could be different. It really could be. Because again, when we think about diversity, when we think about psychological safety, and when we think about the needs of both team members and employers, it's a real powerful convergence of needs. It's a powerful convergence of needs because on one hand, we know people want to be seen, heard, and valued. And on the other hand, we know employers want high-performing teams who are innovative. Well, what's really powerful is consistently, the data shows that this is a win-win opportunity. We've seen studies out of Nokia, Google, VW, Disney, that when people felt more included, valued, and safe, and when there was a sense of psychological safety within the culture, there was a psychological safety is correlated with high team performance and a high appetite for learning. So this is, in my mind, a very different conversation for, can we make the case for diversity? It's a very different conversation about, should we hire across these numbers, or what numbers should we be tracking? It's a question of, have we created a condition where the people within it can feel a sense of thriving, as opposed to a sense of strife between each other, and a sense of being silenced and not feeling like their best selves can be expressed? And there's actually a science around this. But before we go further, what is psychological safety? I like to say psychological safety is not safe spaces, right? A safe space might be the nature of two people and a trusting relationship, but what is it? And I won't be able to go into what it isn't, but hopefully by what it is, it gives you a sense of also what it isn't. Psychological safety is, in the words of Dr. Tim Clark, one of the authors, who is a foremost thought leader in this space, is a culture of rewarded vulnerability. And I'm going to break that down in a minute. But Dr. Amy Edmondson, another powerful thought leader in this space, puts forward a more robust definition. Simply put, psychological safety makes it possible to give tough feedback, have difficult conversations without the need to tiptoe around the truth. In psychologically safe environments, people believe that if they make a mistake, others will not penalize or think less of them for it. They also believe that others won't resent them or humiliate them when they ask for information or help. This belief comes about when people both trust and respect each other, and it produces a sense of confidence that the group won't embarrass, reject, or punish someone for speaking up. So psychological safety is the taken for granted belief about how others will respond when you ask a question, seek feedback, admit a mistake, or propose a possibly wacky idea, or sometimes the breakthrough idea. Psychological safety does not imply a cozy situation in which all people are necessarily close friends, nor does it suggest an absence of pressure or problems. So psychological safety is, if you were to think of this as an ecosystem, it should be the air that we breathe in the culture. It should be the pH balance of the culture, if you will. It is how people feel within the culture, and to what degree do they feel safely included, safe to learn, safe to contribute their ideas, and safe to challenge the status quo regardless of their identity. So if one or two people feel safe to do so, it's usual, or it's likely that they might say, I'm not sure what the problem is because I feel safe to speak up. Nothing gets in the way. Like if I raise my hand, Bob listens to me. Well, the question is, if everyone else who do not share your identity, power, privilege, or positionality, if they raise their hands, would they be also listened to? And will they also be given the benefit of the doubt? So going a little bit deeper, what does this look like and why does this matter? Because psychological safety matters because it's not a perk. We are seeing where the data is showing that a significant portion of folks, at this point, 82% of workers believe that psychological safety is baseline expectation when they go to work in a work environment. So this is directly correlated to retention. So can you recruit diverse? Absolutely. Can you retain in the absence of psychological safety? Highly unlikely. We've seen a lot of research on it, and one that I'll pop on here is that in an assessment of over 160 software teams, looking at over 1,000 workers, it showed that psychological safety reduces relational conflict in socially diverse teams. So think about the data that I shared earlier, that with diversity, social diversity minus psychological safety equals relational conflict. The data also shows that social diversity plus psychological safety reduces relational conflict. And that's powerful, right? Because there's a lot of anxiety when people experience difference. And how are we navigating that difference? Another piece of the data, which is also powerful, is that in the absence of psychological safety, we have a culture of fear. And that culture of fear is, by frame of researchers, really what drove Nokia to the ground. Nokia, which many folks know as the company that drove us into the technology generation of everyone having a cell phone, because within Nokia's culture, there was more of an obsession with fear and fear fighting that they lost the ability to be creative. Whereas within Disney, in the now more famous story of Pixar, we saw under the leadership of Ed Catmull, the rise of more innovation and synergy because people felt safe to challenge the status quo and speak up. So no matter who you are, from producer to writer, you could sit in a room shoulder to shoulder and feel like you were being respected for your unique contributions. And this would not be possible if there was no psychological safety. We've also seen this proven time and time again. The third piece is, do people feel like they can meaningfully contribute? And meaningful contribution was looked at in a study called Project Aristotle at Google, where they looked at 180 teams and they were wondering why or what makes each team most effective. Team effectiveness did not come down to the identity or expertise of their most PhD'd team leaders or their star performers. Team effectiveness really happened when they saw people working together and when they recognized that the teams who, out of their collective experience, made space for each other's voice, for each other's contribution, and baseline treated everyone with respect, regardless of identity and status. And finally, the drive for innovation is never as potent as it is today. We know that organizations are really pushing what's the next big thing and where should they go next. Well, in a recent study, it showed that psychological safety was crucial for innovation in innovation teams, right? And this is a very recent study out of Amy Edmondson's work. And it's really important, again, for us to think about this. So where do we go from here? Who owns this? And what do we actually do about this? Whose responsibility is psychological safety and how does it work? Baseline here, in as much as I can cover in our time together, the tone comes from the top, but the commitment is owned by everyone. So a lot of times we see diversity initiatives asking for junior team members to take on the bulk of the work. And yes, there is space for everyone to take on this work as allies, as people with deep awareness of identity-specific experiences. But what changes is that the tone needs to come from the top. The most powerful person in the room is setting the tone, whether by default or design, that their behaviors is affecting how people lean into this space. There has to be a great sense of awareness of how they're showing up, a great sense of awareness of whether or not their presence in a room is fostering or fracturing a sense of safety for everyone. And I like to ask people these two questions. Whether you're a leader or someone in a position of power, notice, what are you signaling? And think of this as almost like the Wi-Fi signal. When someone comes in a room, does it have a chilling effect? Or are people still okay speaking up? Do people feel okay pushing back and challenging you? Or do they feel the need to soften the feedback that they share with you because they are afraid of the pushback that might come from that? And the second piece is, how are you modeling vulnerability? Now, vulnerability and courage is language that we have come across a lot, but modeled vulnerability is really the best work of a senior leader who wants to do this. A senior leader must be okay with being corrected and showing their teams that, hey, I too have made a mistake. And if you've made a mistake, and not that we're encouraging everyone to just go out there and make mistakes for no good reason, but it's okay for us to learn from our mistakes and to think about what we might do differently in a constructive and a productive way. And the very process of a leader owning their mistakes or modeling that they are correctable or that they can help their team members learn from a mistake is really where the powerful work of psychological safety lives out as an action. We can't simply say, this room is psychologically safe, let's all start speaking up. We all know it doesn't work like that. So this is how it really plays out. You know, I love a good formula by now, right? We see an act of vulnerability. What's an act of vulnerability? Raising your hands, right? Hey, I want to ask a question. Or just to be clear, I'd like to correct, my name isn't X, it's Y, or this is my gender pronoun. And you may have mislabeled me. Or we may say, hey, I want to name this project that we're about to go live with. I think there might be some errors in the calculation. Now, that's a vulnerable act. You're speaking up. It requires vulnerability and bravery. From a leader, vulnerability might look like, I have put together this strategic plan and I'm presenting it to you all. Can anyone name for me, is there something in here that I may have missed? That's an act of vulnerability. Now, this is how psychological safety plays out. When that act of vulnerability makes it into the world, is it received with a rewarding response like, thank you for raising that question. Great point. I appreciate you naming this. I'm sorry that I mislabeled you. Or does it get received with a punitive reaction? Like, we don't have time for that. Let's take that offline. Or people going off camera, the big sigh, the roll eye, or here we go again, right? Those are social signals that then have an impact on our sense of safety. The data also says that this does not only have an impact on the sense of safety of the person who experienced it, it has an impact on the people who observed it. And people who observe punitive responses to vulnerable acts also reduce their ability to contribute. And this is quite powerful. So to take this further, it's really important in psychological safety. We want to shoot for the big structural changes. We want to change the way we think and engage with each other. But the micro interactions between team members and leaders really, really matter. We need to be addressing behaviors that signal, you're welcome here, but don't touch or break our stuff. We need to address the behaviors that are not productive to people sharing and speaking up. And how we go about doing that is in stages. So oftentimes leaders might say, everyone come in here, what are your thoughts and opinions? Everyone should just speak up. And what they're striving for is the highest level of psychological safety called challenger safety. The real opportunity is to start with addressing exclusion in all forms, then making it safe for people to be included, modeling that learning and making mistakes is okay, inviting people to contribute, and then welcoming them to challenge the status quo. And how we go about doing that, we make some commitments. We make the commitment that regardless of your status or your position, we all are by default contributing to a culture. So shifting from default mode to design mode and intentionally engaging with culture in a way that we are being thoughtful about what's the most meaningful thing to do and what's the most meaningful way to engage. Also, to be aware that everything that we do or withhold from doing is modeling psychological safety by reinforcing positive responses or amplifying negative, punitive reactions. And ultimately, the tone comes from the top. So we cannot delegate culture. And importantly, we need to shift to measuring what matters for meaningful inclusion. So we oftentimes measure for diversity. And those are important to keep those numbers running in the background, to track for how many people are in the room, how engaged they are. But really, we often miss the opportunity to measure the underlying aspect of it in terms of what are the levels of psychological safety within our culture? And that's something that I'm urging more and more leaders and organizations to pay attention to. And there are ways to do it. So you saw that ladder. We can actually arrive at very specific scores for each stage of psychological safety so people understand the trajectory of what's happening, the real temperature, the real cultural health check of their organization or their team's ecosystem. And then finally, I'll leave you with some ideas. Specific behaviors, conversational turn taking was one of the big findings from the Google research. They found that sharing airtime is a really great way to include voices and moderate this. Inviting ideas and dissent, helping people, anchoring them to the why, especially in a time of change with so much uncertainty, helping people anchor to the why of what exactly you're asking them to do helps them to feel more included. So these are a few tips, and this is just the tip of the iceberg as I'd like to think about it. But I invite you to engage and to explore what psychological safety might look like within your culture, and begin to explore, of all the things that you're measuring, are you measuring the cultural health that sustains your people in a way that feels meaningful? Thank you.
Love, thank you. That was honestly wonderful, and really diving much deeper into the conversation of psychological safety. I found that really powerful. Couple of things really jumped out and resonated for me. Just, I might sound like such a simple sentence, but it really spoke to me of, we sense a tone and a vibe in the atmosphere. And people, they can sometimes pay lip service to saying something, but we feel when it's inauthentic. And that was really powerful to me, just as a reminder to all of us. And always the tone from the top. Thank you so much, love. I'm really, really grateful for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. This was a delight.
Thank you, love.